Welcome to Album Divers. This is a podcast created by two music lovers who still remember listening to albums from start to finish the way the artist intended. We give history, track-by-track analysis, and delve into the music and lyrics of some of the best albums of the past and today. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Album Divers. I'm Shane.
And I'm Trevor.
On this podcast, we take turns choosing albums to discuss and review. We alternate between one album released this calendar year and one that's been around a while.
But we won't be doing it alone this time. We have a special guest with us on our deep dive of an album by one of our favorite bands. Katie, why don't you introduce yourself and tell our listeners what we'll be discussing today?
Hi, I'm Katie Darby Mullins. I teach creative writing at the University of Evansville, and I am the executive writer at Underwater Sunshine Fest, which is kind of a dream come true. It's like I wrote fanfic and then I got to live it. Today we're going to listen to and talk about one of my favorite records of the year, and I am completely unbiased. Butter Miracles Suite by Counting Crows.
Katie, we are so excited to have you along for the ride. Obviously, all three of us are huge Counting Crows fans, but we know that you've got a little history with the band even outside of just being a fan. Can you give us a little bit of a history on how you got to meet the band, how you got to be involved with the festival, and a little bit about that background?
Absolutely. It's a weird story, actually. I always wanted to talk about music, and by the time I was old enough to be a lead writer at Rolling Stone, that job didn't look like it did when Cameron Crowe was doing it. It was a lot more about blogging and a lot less about, interviews or 9,000 word pieces on a Foo Fighters record that isn't contemporary anymore, or whatever I was into at the time. So I started doing some music writing for the local paper. I had a column at a local magazine in Evansville, Indiana. No, you can't find it. But I started doing that when I was about 19. And then when I was 21, I started a music blog called Katie Darby Recommends, fully assuming that nobody would ever read it, but at least I wouldn't bother my friends anymore because they were all sick of hearing, okay, no, I really, really, really want to go track by track through the latest Kanye West record, and I need you to listen for at least 9,000 words. And again, these long exposés, that's just not a thing people have patience for anymore, but the internet's a dumping ground, so I was like, sweet, I've got this. And then I started to think, wait a minute, I could do cool things here. I have a platform. I made a platform. This is how 20-year-olds are. I was impetuous and narcissistic and actually totally correct. So the first thing I tried to do was get Art Alexakis on the phone from Everclear. I'm a gigantic Everclear fan. And then he did it. He calls and just does this great interview with me. And all of a sudden, people are reaching out to me. And again, I'm like 22, 23. By the time I'm 24, I get a call about a woman named Mary Gaucher, who's a brilliant songwriter. She was working on a record called The Foundling. And I happened to see that her publicist was also doing publicity for the Traveling Circus, which was a Counting Crows tour in would have had to have been 2010 because I'm about to get married in this story. So I was so excited to see that she represented the Counting Crows that I wrote back and was like, hey, I have a blog and we have 25 readers every week who come back every week. And I think this is a huge deal, right? I'm like, I will give you my stat counter password and you can see there are more than 2 people who read this thing.
Right, yeah.
And she laughed a lot, I think. And was right too. That was a good choice. The thing is, it winds up one of those 25 at some point had been Adam.
Wow, yeah.
So she calls back. And anyway, our interview was supposed to go 10 minutes, and he wound up pushing a ton of phoners back. We went longer, just kind of had a natural connection. And he was like, hey, I'm doing at the time it was called Smoke and Sand. It was a showcase down in Austin at South by Southwest with Ryan Spalding from Ryan's Smashing Life, which was another very, it is a successful music blog. And he said, you should come. I was like, I just got married. I just started a job. And he was like, oh, it'll be fun. And it was. So that was March 2011. And I guess after that, I just kind of kept hanging around. I don't go away very easily. Once I'm in, I'm in.
Yeah.
But we had natural chemistry as a friendship. There was a lot of just knowledge of making fun of each other, but also deep shared knowledge on books and movies and television and especially music. And he's also, of the people I've met, maybe the most generous of heart and spirit. He's just, he's silly and funny, and he's so kind that the second you meet him, you want to just kind of shield him from the rest of the world because everybody else is not quite as kind as he is. So I wanted to keep him around.
So you were recommending albums on your blog?
It started because I wanted to recommend albums that were not on cycle, because cyclical albums I could usually place a short review and then write a longer review. But off-cycle records, like if I really just wanted to look specifically at Exile and Guyville, and that's it, I'd do that. Or when I did the Everclear interview, I went back and compared Sparkle and Fade to Songs from an American Movie Volume 2, which is a very weird choice, but I wanted to kind of show how anger progresses and grows and changes over time. Mm-hmm. That's not really an article you can place. And like right now, and right as we speak, I'm working on an article about how Courtney Love's brashness was both predicted by 70s kinks and celluloid heroes and the way fame works, but also led directly to Lana Del Rey being able to write more poetic songs about being angry and understanding violence on a sub-physical level and things like that. Well, that doesn't happen without Courtney Love. And so I am currently writing a long essay about Courtney Love that no one will ever read, I'm sure of it. But for me, it was like, I've got to connect the Kinks and Courtney Love and Lana Del Rey. And other weird things have kind of come up as I've been writing it. It's very exciting. Wow. That's what the blog was for. There was a long post about Goodbye the White Stripes, a lot of Harvey Danger. God, do I write a lot about Sean Nelson. But also like when the Foo Fighters' Wasting Light came out, I recommended that. Indie bands. I had one person put a blurb from the blog on the front of a record. It was like the coolest thing that's ever happened to me.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So had you written something on the Counting Crows, and that's how Adam stumbled upon it, or did he just become a fan organically?
I had written on I had written on Saturday Nights and Sunday Mornings.
Oh, great album.
I needed that record in like a weird visceral way. And when it came out, and they've always been my favorite band. Just I should go ahead and clear that. I love Adam, but Adam the front man and Adam my friend have to be different people in my mind.
Interesting.
Because otherwise I would implode. Because his writing is otherworldly. But I think the first time I heard Hanging Tree, it was like looking at a self-portrait that was more real than a real picture. You know what I mean? It was like all of a sudden I got something about myself. Yeah. That whole record's kind of like that. Washington Square is often my favorite Counting Crows song.
Beautiful song.
Though it rotates a lot.
Yeah, it's in my top 5 for sure.
It's so beautiful. And that I loved like a fountain line. I can't think of anything more correct than that, and it had never been stated that way.
And the musical part that overlays that sounds like the water, and I mean it's a perfect line and a perfect sound on that part.
It's just insane. And so that was I'd written that. He must have read that. I honestly don't know this story from his side. But I do know that the first thing that happened when we got on the phone was he said, "Hey, I loved what you wrote about Runaway Dorothy," which was an independent band no one had ever heard of at the time. He's into independent music. He's into unsigned artists. He sometimes talks about the Geffen Family Picnic which was like where all the musicians would go have a picnic and meet each other on the label. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. Things like that don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So he created it.
Hmm.
Yeah, he's basically created a new salon. We have painters, we have graphic designers, we have a manager who's on the business side, we have people who do social media, we have people who write, we have, it's as close to 1920s France as you're ever going to get, is that living room.
That's so cool. I'd love to be a fly on that wall. That's amazing.
Sometimes I look around and I don't know what to make of it. Live came in to play their 25th anniversary.
Mm.
And of course, the room is pin drop silent. You can imagine. They play Lightning Crashes.
Lightning crashing in on Mother Christ.
Oh, look at everybody in there. I've got chills thinking about it. Everybody in the room's crying.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And, we were all shaken up completely. And it was because it shouldn't have happened. It was so good, it shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, the blog was just all over the place. I was all over the place. But it led to me meeting some wonderful people. Cameron McGill, who's one of my very favorite musicians. And poets, but that's a weird story that I shouldn't have interjected into his life. And now I did, and he's doing really well. But I got to meet Cameron. I got to meet... I did an interview with Alan Alton of the Cowboy Junkies. The whole thing was really fun.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of weird that it happened at all. And it's certainly weird that anything came of it.
I think that's amazing. I draw similar parallels to us deciding to start this podcast. This is one of the reasons I think you're such a great guest for us, is because I think there's definitely some kindred spirits here with our just love of music and just feeling like, I don't know if anybody's going to listen or pay attention or care about this, but I'm doing this anyways, so I might as well put a microphone out there and see if people are interested, or I might as well pull my blog up and type and see if anybody starts to listen. And this is how we get to meet people like you. And you mentioned Sean Nelson being somebody that you love. We had him on the show for our last episode, and just things like that just think at the end of the day, it's all about the music, but it does lead to some pretty amazing things. And for you, Katie, is one of those amazing things, can we tie those dots to the course that you now are taking? Did the blog eventually lead to that in a way, or is that a separate entity?
It's weird. So right now I'm teaching senior seminar and advanced fiction at UE. On Friday, I was introducing my seniors to my personal origin story, because my whole thing is do what you're passionate about, do what you love, write your own job. That's the whole beauty of a writing degree, right? You can create your job.
Yeah.
But I always tell it as like, I'm in the middle of two very weird stories, both of which are successful in ways they shouldn't be. And I'm 35. I got tenure last year, which
Very
is
good. Wow.
really cool.
Yeah.
But I also had a poetry book come out, and I have a couple of other manuscripts ready to go. I'm in the querying process. So as I'm writing the blog, I'm also writing short fiction, a couple novels. I think I've got 2 completed books of poetry, one that's now been published. I'm in the process of working on combining the essay collection and making it a memoir, and querying about that. That's
you're not
been
busy
really
at all.
successful.
Yeah,
No, never.
right.
And I just started writing a TV pilot, which I'm like super excited about.
Whoa, that's cool.
Wow.
Yeah, so the only thing I would say the blog has in common with that is first, now it means I get to teach a class called How to Write About Music.
Yes.
By having done the blog, I get to teach that class because
Yes.
I'm now technically qualified, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
The other thing is it gave me practice writing about things I really cared about. It helped me lean into my own voice, which obviously is not succinct. I like to say it doesn't matter if you're Faulkner or you're Hemingway. Both of them found their thing. And I tend a little more Faulkner on the scale, but that's okay. And I think that the blog helped me hone my voice, and it helped me learn how to teach my students. No, so you're into video games? Start writing video games. Start doing it now. Start practicing. Write about video games. Call developers. Get used to it. Start pursuing it. So that, the blog does tie in.
That's good advice.
And it meant that the things I've done with music, I do. There's a radio show on our local NPR that I've been on. I do sometimes podcasts like this. James Campion asked me for a quote about Hey Jude in his forthcoming book about Hey Jude.
That's awesome.
I don't even know how to express how exciting
That's
that is
sweet.
to me. And, I sometimes go to New York for a week. That's technically professional development for me. So the blog did allow me to use things that are mostly just me having fun and turn them into work. And that doesn't mean they're work for me. It just means they count as work later.
Well, your writing is beautiful. You sent us some samples, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to have to go back and look through that. I think part of it is you just being a naturally gifted writer, but also writing about things that you're really passionate about makes that come through even more. And so that's good that you're passing it on to your students and not just making them feel like they're taking a class and doing assignments, but they're actually doing something for themselves that they're going to appreciate and look back on and enjoy.
Yeah.
And that's, I told them, I have the two best jobs in the world. One of them didn't exist, and my dad, when I told him about the festival the first time, actually teared up and said, "This is what I always wanted for you. You're an A&R rep." I was like, right. Yeah, this is what A&R reps used to do. We find new bands, we write about them, we bring them in, we showcase them.
So cool. That's amazing.
So dad got it.
I would have killed to take your class in college, is what I was telling
That was
Shane.
my first question.
Then I
How
realized,
come my college didn't offer classes like yours? I mean, how to write about music? Obviously, I would sign up for that. But
I was saying all that and then realizing I would like to take your class now. That's incredible. But, Shane and I have talked in some prior podcasts. One of the impetus for us starting this is just slowing down and really listening to music from start to finish. I has texted Shane a little screenshot of your syllabus that you sent us, where there was a particular day that you mentioned an assignment about why it's important to listen to music from start to finish. And we've talked on prior podcasts about not being real sure if that's something that still exists or will continue to exist. We start feeling like old guys as we say it, but I'm always curious if the youth are doing that, if in the age of Spotify and streaming, if the album format is still important in the hearts of people just finding their musical inspiration and diving into music. What has been your experience with students coming in with an assignment like that? Is it a foreign practice to them, or are most of them doing that?
So the class is a little bit of a self-selecting group, but there are 3 different types of students in there, and they all listen to music very differently. And so you have people like us, the road dogs, right? Like we're going to listen top to finish. We want to know why it's organized the way it is. My husband Andy and I were talking last night about Amy Mann and the progression from whatever to Bachelor number 2 and what happened, right? I was like, you know what? If you move I'm With Stupid before whatever, and then you take First Day After the Fair, you move it to the second to the last track, you get rid of this song, you move this around, then I think whatever fits. And I realized that's an insane conversation. Like, there's no way my students are having that conversation, right?
Yes,
Nobody's doing that. So we have the road dog guys. They are usually people who also play and people who care about narrative arc, because a lot of musicians are very conscious of how their arc works these days. Mm-hmm. So I do have a group of students that love and appreciate that. And to those people, I always have, a ton of recommendations. And, I'll have a student who mostly listens to Spotify recommendations until they hit something they love. But usually they'll bring it back to me. So that's how I discovered Rayland Baxter. He came up on someone's Spotify algorithm. They checked out his record, and then we listened to Strange American Dream together like 17 times.
I saw Rayland out at Hardly Strictly Bluegrass in San Francisco back in 2019, right before the pandemic. That was my last big festival before the pandemic. He's great.
Was he as good as I would imagine?
Oh yeah, very good. Yeah.
I get Amelia Baker in my head so constantly that it's almost like my brain's elevator music. Like the melody on that thing is so just catchy.
Yeah. Right. So recap the 3 types of students. You said
sorry. So there are 3 types.
Roadie.
There are the people who do it, like we do, right?
Yeah.
Then you have what I call the algorithm generation.
Okay.
I would say that's my biggest category. So these are people who like one song and then listen to whatever Spotify or Apple Music fills in next. I can't be too derisive about that because originally I thought that was just absolutely absurd. But they actually taught me that there's a lot to discover that way.
Mm-hmm.
I became a huge Junip fan that way.
Yeah, I just started listening to them too. Crazy.
What is happening with them? They're the best, but they're like not a huge band. I don't know why we're not always talking about Junip, but like I found Junip through an algorithm. And the thing is, the second I heard Without You, I went, okay, I got to go back and listen to the whole record. So I went over to Fields and just listened to the whole thing.
Nice.
I think that if algorithm listeners can get to where that's how they do it, they can be really solid music journalists. And that's kind of how I approach that now. The algorithm isn't an enemy. You know?
Yeah, whether it's organically through word of mouth or Spotify and the algorithms, that is one way we share and discover music, which is great. I think the one thing that Trevor and I have talked about is whether or not you stop there and just listen to those couple tracks that made it on the list, or if you say, hey, I really like these guys, I want to go dive in deeper and discover
a lot of
that
people
whole
never
album.
dive deeper this generation coming up. So
and,
we are a lot older.
Right, yeah. And I think I can admit it, and maybe Trevor felt the same way before us getting into this podcast, that we were maybe losing a little bit of that album exploration part of us, just being wrapped up in college and then the work life and fast pace. We're consuming music when we're working out or cooking or hanging out with friends, and we're not really listening with headphones and not doing anything else and really diving into the music with the lyrics in front of us and really trying to understand it like we did naturally as kids, when all you had was a collection of CDs and you're driving around in your car by yourself and you got the music on repeat. You memorize the lyrics just by singing the songs and being a kid who can just be a sponge and absorb all that information. You don't need to go look up the lyrics online. You just learn them through listening, and then you make those connections probably subconsciously and don't even really understand like how much that album is doing to your life and your development as a person. And then you get into your adulthood and you kind of lose sight of that. So this has forced us to resume that part of us that was there, in our development, and also go back on some of those old ones and pick up new ones. And it's really been a fun process, and something that I think we feel like we're kind of becoming advocates for and need to push, that everybody needs to be doing this. If you're a fan of music and you like this, at least have a few bands that you follow and listen to all their stuff and really try to understand it for more than just that listening experience, but for like the story that they're telling and the writing and the concepts and themes and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've kind of got to honor some of that. And what's funny to me is, I say algorithm listening and this and that. It happened before Spotify and Apple Music. It wasn't the radio either, but bands would do it, right? And, we're talking about the Counting Crows, so I can casually say, got no place but home to go, got Ben Folds on my radio. Everybody was referring to everybody. Remy Zero releases Life in Rain, which starts with the line, I once had marigolds for eyes. So next year when This Desert Life comes out, a song starts, all my friends have flowers in their eyes, but I've got none this season. The Laurel Canyon sound is all cross-pollination between people who are cross-pollinating. And, I would argue, I think that there are two really brilliant examples of ways to get the algorithm without Spotify. And the number one is actually Lana Del Rey's Norman fucking Rockwell. It goes through so many references. There's a song called Cinnamon Girl that doesn't reference Neil Young at all.
Really? Okay.
But then later, there's a song where she says, Crosby, Stills, and Nash were playing, leaving Young out again, which is fascinating. But then she talks about Joni Mitchell, and she references Sublime. She covers Sublime. There's all these different things, and she talks about hip hop. She talks about lots of 70s sort of references there. We also get the literature stuff from her, so she's a great algorithm listener. And the other band I would say is an algorithm generator is Ockerville River. Their song Plus Ones is literally just, I think it starts, no one wants to hear about the 97th tier, so close your eyes. Every line is a number in rock and roll plus one. I'm not going to tell you, baby, about the fourth time you were ladied. I mean, it's all over the place, and it's great. But they also have songs where they weave old melodies in. There's a song called "Sitting at Home Listening to Otis Redding During Christmas Time," where he actually plays part of "Dreams to Remember" and sings at the end in that song, "I've got dreams, dreams to remember." And that's how it fades out. It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
But he also has a song where they repurpose Sloop John B and use it as a suicide note. And they use different lyrics. And then he has a song where he talks about Ray Davies and his tracheotomy, which I didn't know about. And so they tell me this great story. And then the song fades out on like it's a mellotron or some kind of synthed out keyboard going da 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 da. It's gorgeous. If you don't know a lot of music, listen to Lana Del Rey and On Curve River and just look up the lines you don't know. They know what they're doing. And I have students who will do that. The third group is a weird one though, and it's people who don't listen to music at all but take the class because they want to. And I didn't know there was a thing.
Yeah, I
did not know that
either.
existed.
Yeah.
So they always surprise me.
People who don't listen to music kind of scare me.
I found it terrifying at first. And then I was like, wait, I get to tell them what to listen to. And I was like, this is great.
Fresh canvas.
Tabula rasa.
Yeah. But, I have people who come in and they're like, yeah, I only listen to music when it's on the video game. And I was like, okay, cool. You're going to start by writing about video game music.
Sure, yeah.
And why that's a tone setter.
Yeah.
Eventually, like, I think on the syllabus, did I put that we were going to watch a full Guns N' Roses concert on there? Or did I leave that off on purpose? So we watched a full Guns N' Roses concert from 1987. Yeah. And to say it was a loud misogynistic affair is obviously an understatement. And Gen Z reacts a little bit against things like Guns N' Roses. I mean, Axl says at one point, turn around, I got a use for you and I'm bored. Right? This is stuff that was on the radio.
Yeah.
And they get kind of mad. And I was like, no. Not only do you not get to judge this because it's a different time, you don't get to judge this because look at how much fun everybody there is having. So you're not going to approach this from a political standpoint. I need you to approach this from a why did this work standpoint.
Yeah.
And do you know every single person had a different answer for why it worked? That means at least 20 things were working.
Yeah.
And there's still
anthropological discussion.
Yeah, and so many people didn't like Guns N' Roses, but I actually accidentally had 3 people by Appetite for Destruction. So, what are you gonna do?
How many years have you been teaching the course?
It's not offered every year, so I've only really gotten to teach it twice. I'm hoping to teach it in the spring, but we'll see. But I always, if somebody comes to me with a piece on music, which happens weekly, I work with them and hone it and do this and that.
Each year that you do teach it, do you think there's things that you learned from the prior year that are going to dictate how you might present it in future years?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I now recommend people take a coding class.
Oh,
I
really?
haven't. I don't know how to, but I think it's important. Next time I've added a unit on podcasting.
Okay.
Because I think we're writing right now, It's just an interview and a conversation.
Right. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it's so much fun, but like things like that I have to add every year. Like, okay, so you're going to learn how to do a track by track review. Nobody will ever ask you to do that again, but you have to learn how so that when you do write a 500 word synopsis, you know which tracks to pull and why. So I back them up and teach them the stuff that Kurt Loder knows how to do. And then I fast forward them through the VJ thing and get them through the MTV era and kind of plant them in so here's how you blog. Because that's what you do now.
I keep thinking it almost feels like fate that we brought you on the show, Katie, talking about Sean Nelson, who we just had on as a guest, and Lana Del Rey, who we just released our most recent episode on her new album, Chemtrails Over the Country Club, which was amazing.
Oh, man.
I got to mention, too, you brought up Sloop John B. That made me think about when we reviewed the Beach Boys album Pet Sounds. And we, as a lead up to that, we brought on a couple of Trevor's mom's dear friends from high school. And they're lifelong Beach Boys fans. And their friendship developed through their love of the Beach Boys, and in large part, I believe, if I get the story right. But we brought them on the show and talked about their musical experiences listening to the Beach Boys and how things have changed over the time from when they were listening to today's generation. And one thing they talked about that stood out to me that makes me think about what we're talking about here and diving into albums is that back in the day, they would have watch parties. Or not watch parties, me. They would have listening parties where somebody, they'd have a circle of friends and somebody would decide to go out and buy the album. And then, hey, everybody come over. We're going to listen to this new album that just got released. It wasn't on Spotify. It wasn't, accessible anywhere else except going to the record store and buying that vinyl. And maybe they had 10 copies and only a few people in town get them. So you invite your friends over and you sit down and you listen to the album start to finish. Everybody's getting their first listen together. And how that's just something that would rarely happen today, if ever.
I'm super honored y'all are having me on at all, but it is strange to me how much overlap there is in our taste. I was realizing, Trevor, we're from the same era, but it sounds like both of our parents were really into music as well. Both of my parents managed record stores.
I saw you write about that in the syllabus with your mother. I didn't realize your dad also had run a record store.
Oh, he would be so sad if he heard that because he actually did it a very long time, and he wound up retiring last year as the vice president at a bank. But this year he is running an incredibly successful discogs store.
No
he
way.
now buys and sells records. It's like his passion.
It is interesting how some of that stuff just overlaps in some ways because we mentioned Sean Nelson being quoted on your syllabus. You've got Jason Isbell on there as well, who we're both big fans
that was
of.
my first pick when we started this podcast.
Oh, really? Which one? Which one did you pick?
We did Something More Than Free. It was really tough to decide between that and Southeastern, but
it really is.
I went with the probably less popular one of the two.
You're probably right, but Something More Than Free does something for me.
Oh, yeah, it did for me,
I can't really... Well, first, actually, I got released from occupational therapy after my stroke when I proved I could play that song on guitar. So that song will always be.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, but my favorite Jason Isbell song is Speed Trap Town. Which,
it's such a good song.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's a heartbreaking song. Yeah.
There are so many times we'll be listening to him, and it'll be a song we know by heart. He'll say something, we'll just be like, man, fuck that guy. Like, it's so good. Like, fuck
stop
him.
it.
Like, we just get so mad. It's him and John Darnell and Of the Mountain Goat, too. Every once in a while, we'll listen to something and just go, oh, fuck him. And, like, we already know the song. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That was part of what started the Amy Mann deep dive. Was, oh, fuck her for this. She's too good at this.
Yes, exactly. I feel like that about Adam Duritz sometimes, too.
Yeah, me too, which is really hard.
Yeah.
It is really awkward to like be in his guest room going, oh, fuck that guy.
Well, with your writing background, your taste in music makes sense because you like a lot of people that are known for being great songwriters and not just musicians or instrumentalists, but people who really pour their heart and soul into the words, like the Counting Crows, like Sean Nelson, Jason Isbell. It's
funny. I always say that Sean Nelson taught me a language for anger and disappointment on Where Have All the Merrymakers Gone? Because that hit me at a real formative time. And in Terminal Annex, where he says, I'm dreaming of the fist fight I never got into and thinking of all the mean shit I wish I'd said to you. It just like everything made sense all of a sudden. It flipped and filed down. So finally, I'm in the hospital. I'm in PT daily. I'm in rehab after my stroke at this point. And I thought, you know what? I'm brave enough to try listening to Terminal Annex. Because I'd pretty much listened exclusively to Bowie after the stroke. It was real close to the 1-year anniversary of his death. And I kind of had held him up as a little bit of a guardian angel. And I know that's silly, but my private relationship with David Bowie's music is weird and sacred, and I care very much about him. So I listened to David Bowie so that I would live. And I know that sounds dumb, but it worked. So
You're talking to two people who don't think that sounds dumb. Let me put that
I'm glad
both as music fans and physical therapists.
And one of which has a dog named Bowie, so obviously
right.
he
I
knows
almost
the power.
said you've got the best dog name ever there. I listened to Ziggy Stardust 8,000 times, that kind of thing. But then I thought I'm brave enough to try listening to Terminal Annex, because that's where I go when I'm frustrated, And for some reason, that line that I told you was always the one I connected to. And I wasn't ready then for him to say, save your little wheelchair empowerment films. It isn't pretty to think so, but I can't feign interest now, which of course is a Hemingway reference. But more than that, I was staring down the barrel of, am I going to be in a wheelchair? And torn between mourning that and being furious that anybody had the audacity to suggest it.
Yeah.
And, so Save Your Little Wheelchair Empowerment films had been hidden like a bomb in my brain for years.
Sometimes you listen to something through a new lens, and what a great description of like a little, not like a bomb, more like a landmine, being buried.
Yeah, it was
there.
like
you stepped on, and it was
IED
there all
of
along.
some
You just
sort,
you never knew it was there. Yeah.
It was so weird. I wound up later telling Sean about it a little bit, and he was incredibly kind to me while I was ill. He's always, Sean's just a nice guy. He's just kind.
We got that impression.
He gave up about close to 5 hours of his time to come talk with us.
Yeah.
A few weeks ago. That was amazing.
He's a delight.
Yeah.
And little by little, such a great record.
Yeah.
You don't get bored listening to him. He's the kind of guy you can just say, okay, go on, just keep talking.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a lot of fun.
And he knows so much. His literary references are insane, but he also knows everything about music.
Yeah.
Katie, did you mention earlier something about listening to an album and wanting to rearrange the songs because they didn't fit right?
Yeah.
About thinking, well, if you put this here, you put that there. Okay, did I catch that?
I was arguing. So we were talking about Amy Mann's Whatever.
Right, yeah.
I do think it is perfect. It is not as good as her other perfect records.
Okay, gotcha.
Which is a hard argument to make. How can something be perfect and not as perfect? Well, if you can write as well as Amy Mann can, then you get to do that.
Well, I wanted to mention, and it's kind of a side note, I didn't want to throw you off earlier because it probably wasn't totally relevant, but that made me think of this exercise that Trevor challenged me with, I don't know, a few months ago. He had put together, I can't remember how you phrased it, the perfect Counting Crows album, not necessarily your top 10 songs, but from their entire discography, pick 10 songs and create your perfect Counting Crows album for whatever reason that may be, whether it's a concept or a theme or just some songs that had to make it on there, and try to piece them together. So he did this in preparation for exposing his unborn child at the time, right, William, to the music?
Yeah.
So he put this together and said, this is the collection of Counting Crows that I'm going to have my firstborn child, William, listen to when he comes to join us here on Earth. And so he shared his Counting Crows album with me, and then said, for me to do the same. So challenged me to come up with mine. And it's a really tough thing to do. I mean, we didn't even have to write the songs or put the music together, but all we had to do was pick from, over 100 songs and try to just grab 10 and place them together. And even that part alone is tough to do. So then imagine the people who are writing the songs and making the songs, and then where does it go? And are we finished? Is it done yet? It's kind of like if you're writing, right? If you're writing a book or
it's insane,
an essay,
yeah.
or even doing a movie, how do you know when it's finished? How do you know when it's complete? And do you need another scene, or do you need another chapter or another song? And is this out of order? But it was a fun experiment for us to try to put together this perfect Counting Crows album. And just a glimpse of what an artist has to do.
No, that's really good.
We'll share them with you. We might have to make you do it.
I was going to say, I'll do it. I'll play it
too.
Yeah. Sort of like
let's
August
do it.
Nights and Butter Miracle or Satellites.
Oh, and I'm pretty sure Washington Square was on mine. So I was thinking about that earlier when you were saying that's one of your favorite songs.
Unfortunately, no matter what, that's going to have to anchor me.
Right? Yeah.
Now, wait, do we get to count the stuff on Across a Wire? Because that version of Have You Seen Me Lately, it would make mine too.
You make the rules.
Yeah.
Okay,
Other than
make
those
the
10
rules. I'll play the
Yeah.
game.
Yeah, you do it.
10
yeah.
Counting Crows tracks, create the perfect album. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
That
We should
sounds
put
so
that out
fun.
there
You
to
know, I'm
a lot of
definitely gonna
people,
do
to the
that.
Counting Crows group. We could throw that out there too, Trevor. And
I did throw my list out there. I
you?
actually did that, as Counting Crows fans do. They had all kinds of thoughts and opinions, which was totally fun for me.
yeah, it's funny.
Yeah,
You
we're-
sent me a list, and I can't remember who did it, but it was somebody that was supposed to have credibility, giving the top 50 Counting Crow songs of all time or something. And I think I disagreed with a lot of them. I think some of my favorite were toward the bottom. I'm like, no way, this guy's totally wrong. I guess that's just a testament to how many great songs they have that speak to people differently, you know, because my
and
favorites
your
were
personal connection
toward the
to
bottom
them.
of his
Yeah.
list. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, I always have weird ones.
Yeah.
Weird favorites.
Yeah, it kind of depends on your mood and what you're connecting with for whatever reason. But you said, Katie, that Counting Crows is your favorite band?
They're my favorite band. David Bowie is my favorite musician. It's really
Okay.
hard to
Yeah.
to not say both. So,
So have you been following them since the very beginning, since the early 90s, and been a fan?
mid
all along?
90s, mid
Mid-90s?
90s.
Okay, cool.
I think I bought my first Counting Crows record when I was 9.
Awesome.
And so I became a gigantic fan. So by the time I'm a teenager, I used to like to clip my Discman to my belt loops and go on bike rides because that's what you did in the 90s and early
Right.
2000s. And I used to listen to Recovering the Satellites and the VH1 Storytellers Across a Wire disc just over and over and over. And I had the Flying Demos and a bunch of stuff like that. So I was hitting Love and Addiction and Marjorie pretty hard too.
Yeah.
I mean, I still know those songs in my bones. It's a marrow level. And so my dad and my mother divorced when I was going into high school, my 8th grade year, somewhere in that area. And I, as teenagers do, decided to become judge, jury, and executioner on things I didn't fully understand. And I kind of just stopped talking to my dad for a long time, which sucks. He was my concert and music buddy. He's my guy who stays up late with me and watches concerts when I'm home. We did everything musical together. So finally one day he's like, hey, what can I do to get you to talk to me again? Because he didn't give up. He kept emailing, he kept calling, he kept dropping by the house. It just wasn't going to happen. I'm a Texan woman, and all 4'11" of me was just resistant. And so I said, you know what? Counting Crows are opening for The Who in Sacramento on July 4th. You want to talk to me? We'll talk in Sacramento. And, he called my bluff. Yeah, he called my bluff. So The Who is one of my other favorite bands, and I'd always wanted to see them. And he's a huge fan. He'd gotten me into Who's Next by like the time I was 5. I was very, very competent at turning records over. The story goes he taught me how to use a turntable when I was 2 because I needed to flip the White Album. So he's very involved that way. So he buys tickets and gets plane tickets. And a week before we're supposed to go, John Entwistle overdoses in a Las Vegas hotel room. And I basically said, okay, well, that's a sign. We're not talking. This is just not happening. John Entwistle's the Who's bassist, just in case. And so, like, and in a move that I have actually seen Pete Townsend say he regrets, he decides to go on with the tour because he says the people behind the scenes need a job. Everybody has tickets. We're going to do this. He was not fond of the idea to start with. If he hadn't done it, my parents wouldn't be remarried, which they are, to each other.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Because that trip was the beginning of sort of rebuilding everything.
That's amazing.
Huh.
So the Counting Crows and the Who are at the center of the origin story for how I know how to love. And it's really a beautiful, maybe the most beautiful love story I've ever seen play out in real life. Because they relearned each other. But they did because Pete Townsend pushed on. So sorry, Pete. Thank you, Pete.
Wow. All right, Katie, it's been a pleasure talking about all those stories and hearing your connections to music and Counting Crows. I'm sure we could talk forever on that, about diving into music and lyrics and album construction, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of that as we get into the album. But let's, for the sake of time, transition into talking a little bit more about the Counting Crows. Trevor, I know you did a little bit of history and put something quick here together just to introduce the band to whoever's maybe been living under a rock and doesn't know of the Counting Crows. I know they're one of your favorite bands of all time, and mine as well. Before you get into the history, when did you become a fan?
Sure. It was kind of a revolution to both of us when we did our introduction episode, even me as I was saying it, that part of the background to me starting this podcast with you was this history I have with my dad of us going to this little record store in Eastern Washington, and me picking an album of something that I had heard on the radio or seen on MTV, and then him grabbing an album from his era, and then us putting him on in the car and driving to Seattle to watch baseball games together. And I remember going into that record store, trying to decide what to get, and recalling seeing Long December music video on MTV the week before and asking the cashier, can you help me find this? I think it's called Recovering the Satellites. He walked me over to it, and I remember that being my entry point. And I got hooked on Recovering the Satellites, and then it was backwards to August and Everything after that, and I've been a fan ever since, and kind of obsessively as well. I went back and got all the flying demos and all the unreleased things, and then just the live performance, and fell in love with how Adam changes lyrics and makes everything alive and new. And it's a long time in between albums, as we'll talk about when we get into the history and leading up to this one too, but it's kind of like the next chapter of a story every time he puts out a new album. I don't have the luxury like you, Katie, of knowing him outside of the front man, but I sort of feel like I do just because I've read and watch and listen, and so when the next album comes out, I try to see if I can sometimes connect those dots in interviews and the experiences that I know that he has had and make their way into lyrics. Maybe sometimes I'm conjecturing and not 100% accurate, but it feels like I'm a part of it, and I think that's one of the things I appreciate about Counting Crows is it just feels like he really lets you into his world, even if it's through your lens of interpretation as a fan.
He's brilliant at, and this is something I tell my writing students, specificity and using your personal details actually connects someone to you closer than trying to write something vague that everybody can understand.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I Want to Hold Your Hand isn't as effective as A Day in the Life. Both are good songs. One of them's a masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
It's because the specificity and Adam is the king of telling his story in a way that makes it feel like a universal story.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Shane, do you remember your entry point to Counting Crows?
I've been thinking about that. I'm not sure. I've been a fan as long as I can remember. I'm sure I discovered them somewhere junior high or high school, late 90s, early 2000s. So at that point, a few of their albums were already out. But I do remember I had pretty much the full collection. Hate to admit it, but I didn't pay for them because I was a broke high school kid. But those were the Napster days, and when you had a band that you really enjoyed, you could go find their music. And I remember having all of them in my collection that I had burned and drawn all over them and made them fancy and whatnot, put my own album art on there. And it was definitely a special part of my collection. And then, of course, I followed them over the years, all their new stuff that they continue to release. I think when I really became a huge fan was probably in 2009. I was fortunate enough to see them live in concert twice within, I think, about a 10-day time span. This would have been right after I graduated from college, and I was back home working. I was working the 2 to 10 shift at the nursing home as a CNA, and my buddy, who was a huge music fan as well, was working as an EMT, and we both had to work that full week, but we were talking about going to Summerfest, music festival in Milwaukee. And we're kind of back and forth on, should we go? Is it possible? Can we make it happen? And so long story short, we went, and we left about 11 o'clock at night, drove through the night all the way to Milwaukee from Carroll, Iowa, which was about I don't know, 6 or 7 hours or more, something like that. We borrowed my mom's van. We took the seats out of the back and we put like this sleeping setup in the back of her van, and we took it to Milwaukee. So you get a 3-day general pass, I think was like $33 or something back then, which is crazy. We got 3 days of music,
Right.
36 hours of music for $33. So that's what convinced us to do it. We were like, yeah, we can do it. So we both had like Saturday, Sunday, Monday off, or Friday, Saturday, Sunday off, or something like that. I can't remember exactly. So we were like, okay, so we can leave at 11. We can get there. We can sleep for a couple hours. We can do the festival, and then we'll drive home that following night and work the next day. It was crazy, but we kept seeing the lineup and looking at the shows that were free. And then there was this stage that you had to pay for. And I think it was like, I don't know, pretty cheap. It was like an extra $25-30 or something. But back then it probably seemed like a lot. And I remember my buddy saying like, hey, the Counting Crows are going to be opening for Keith Urban. And we were both huge Counting Crows fans. Neither one of us country fans back then at all, and not Keith Urban fans. But we knew Counting Crows were opening. And so he convinced me like, yeah, it'll be worth it. They'll at least play for an hour and, you know, it'll be fun. So we got Counting Crows tickets the first night and saw them. And then, so that was like the highlight of this big festival, which stands out in my mind as just like a really fun experience where I did something kind of crazy. We paid off the security guard at the parking lot and just let us stay there like overnight in my mom's van, because we didn't even know where we were going to stay, because there was nowhere to go. But we were just parked underneath this big overpass downtown Milwaukee by this festival, and we were asking the guy like, where can we park? Where can we stay? And he's like, well, if you give me $25, I'm going to be here all weekend. I won't tell anybody. So we camped out in the van all weekend, lived out of a cooler of, I don't know, lunch meat and beer. And but yeah, so the whole experience is just very vivid in my mind. And Counting Crows, seeing them was great because we were both big fans, and that was my first time seeing them live. And then I get back from this festival, I got to work a full week, and another friend of mine who's also a big Counting Crows fan says, hey, Counting Crows are going to be at Saturday in the Park up in Sioux City. It's a free concert. There's going to be music all day, 4th of July festival. So that following weekend, we drove up to Sioux City, Iowa, and got to see them perform at that 4th of July festival. And that was incredible because they played for at least 2 hours, and they mixed in some patriotic songs. I remember they played This Land Is Your Land, and the whole crowd was singing along, and then they shot fireworks off afterward while they were still singing and playing, and it was just crazy. And after that, like, I had so much firsthand close experience with seeing Adam on stage and his presence and just absorbing the music. I was like, all right, that's it, I'm hooked. I'm a Counting Crows fan for life.
You never given me all those details
no,
before,
I
Shane.
guess
That was fun listening to you.
I didn't fill in on those details earlier when I brought up
great.
the Summerfest.
That's great.
Yeah, it was good.
So awesome. It's weird we both have July 4th Counting Crows stories.
Oh, yeah.
That's very, we had fireworks too.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, very cool. And Trevor, how many times have you seen them? I know you've seen them in concert quite a bit.
I would say close to a dozen, perhaps.
And Trevor's
something.
the concert junkie.
I think
can't even count how
probably
many.
shy of a dozen, but
Wow.
but approaching it is what I would probably say.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I'm trying to add it up and I'm terrified. I have no idea how many times I've seen them. We're pushing 25 in my head.
Oh, that's
from
awesome.
what I remember.
That's awesome.
Unfortunately, I haven't seen them since then, but they're on my radar. They go touring again. This will be great. You know, they're. I know I heard in an interview that Adam is really looking forward to going on tour and singing the full suite of songs, and the challenge that'll be to play music for 18 minutes without really a break or a pause. I'm sure they'll jam on some sections, and they'll probably stretch it out to 25-30 minutes or so, knowing what they typically do live. But then they're also working on their second Butter Miracle Suite 2, from what I hear from rumors going around there. So I don't know if that'll be another 4 or 5 songs to complete a full album, kind of like Saturday nights and Sunday mornings in a way. I wonder if they'll be different themes, or if they'll connect, almost like a movie and a sequel coming out. I'm looking forward to that. So maybe they'll go on tour and do the whole shebang. I don't know. We'll see timing wise, but it'd be awesome to see them once they get all this new stuff out there.
Yeah, they're playing the suite and it's going really well. We wound up missing it, but I've seen some videos and I've heard from Sean Barna and Matt Susich, who are opening, that it's just outrageously good, and I'm completely unsurprised.
Yes, yeah.
So, but yeah, I'd be remiss to not mention that I think that it was logical for Adam to be concerned about playing a 4-song suite.
Yeah.
But I guess if you know the band, you also know not really. It's not really
right.
a risk.
If you're still here at this point,
right? Like you're in.
Know, if you expect it a little, yeah, you're in at this point. Yep.
I was watching an interview with Adam, and he was saying that he was worried that he might be a little out of shape. He said, I'm getting up there in age, and he said he'd been working on his core and doing some cardio because
right.
he wasn't
I'm
sure
trying
if he'd
to eat
have
right
the,
and do some sit-ups.
Oh,
yeah, he
God,
wasn't sure if
Adam.
he'd have the lungs or the windpipe to last that long. He's like, I don't want to be up there on stage, winded and trying to sing.
He's in better shape than I am. That's awesome.
Yeah,
though.
I'm excited to see them again sometime, hopefully in the near future, because it sounds like this new album, Butter Miracle, Sweet One, was something that Adam's really proud of. So it sounds like when he was out in England, he was really inspired by the surroundings, or moved to hop on the piano and start playing and writing again, and that's essentially where Butter Miracle was born. And he speaks really highly of it, that maybe it's some of his best work or something he's most proud of, that it kind of reignited that passion for music that was maybe a little dormant, considering they haven't put out anything in 7 years, I believe. And that this was something different, this project, this idea of putting 4 tracks seamlessly woven together, is something he was kind of playing around with. And since it's taken off, it sounds like he's maybe going to work with that going forward too. So it's pretty cool, because after 30 years of making music, he's finding some new interest that's going to get the creative juices flowing and probably create some really good content. So I'm excited to follow them going forward and see them live. So before we dive into the new Counting Crows album, Butter Miracle, Trevor, why don't you give the listeners a little background on the band and a brief history of who they are, and a little bit about where they've come over the past 30 years up to this point.
Yeah, that's a lot to cover. I'm going to try to be brief because I know we're going to dive into another Counting Crows album in the future, and I'll get to rehash all of this, and I really am excited just to get into these tracks. But just for anybody, like you said, who might be living underneath a rock, Counting Crows originally formed in Berkeley in 1991, and it started as an acoustic duo. Singer Adam Duritz, who is in a couple other Bay Area bands, began playing with guitarist Dave Bryson as a side project. By 1993, the band had grown to a stable lineup of Duritz as vocalist, occasional pianist, and primary songwriter, Bryson still on guitar, Matt Maley playing bass guitar, Charles Gillingham on keyboards, and Steve Bowman as drummer. They quickly created a demo tape and caught the attention of several record labels, with Geffen winning the bidding war. Their debut album, August and Everything After, was released in 1993 with hits like Mr. Jones, Round Here, and Rain King, among many others, propelling the album to 7 times platinum and 2 Grammy nominations. During this time, they also added second guitarist Dan Vickery, who was also a Bay Area native. In 1996, they released their second album called Recovering the Satellites, which broke from the folk roots of their debut and incorporated more electric guitar and distortion thanks to Dan's addition. Lyrically, the album dealt with Adam Duritz's disequilibrium with his newfound fame coming off the success of August and Everything After. It went 2 times platinum in the US and featured hits like A Long December, among others. In 1999, Counting Crows released their third album, This Desert Life, which saw the band experimenting with lush and spacious sounds, but keeping many of the elements that made the first 2 albums successful. Longtime session guitarist David Immergluck joined the band officially for this album and subsequent tour. Hits like Hangin' Around and Colorblind was also featured as the soundtrack to the movie Cruel Intentions, and propelled this album to platinum status as well in the US. In 2002, Counting Crows released their more heavily produced and radio-friendly record called Hard Candy, with hits like Joni Mitchell's cover of Big Yellow Taxi featuring Vanessa Carlton and American Girls featuring Sheryl Crow. During this time, drummer Ben Mize left the band amicably to focus on family and other projects and was replaced by drummer Jim Bogus, formerly a drummer for Ben Folds and Sheryl Crow. Also following the tour for the album, longtime bassist Matt Maley left the band and was replaced by Millard Powers. In 2003, they released a greatest hits album called Films About Ghosts. In 2004, their song Accidentally in Love appeared on the soundtrack for the movie Shrek 2 and was nominated for Academy Award. In 2008, the band released Saturday Nights and Sunday Mornings, which was a concept album about chaos and debauchery of Saturday night, being the more rock-driven first half of the record, and The Morning After, represented by the stripped-down, more acoustic-based second half, Sunday Mornings. To further paint distinction between these two halves, Saturday Nights was produced by Gil Norton, who also produced their more rock-heavy second album, Recovering the Satellites, that we mentioned. And Sunday Mornings, the second half, was produced by Brian Deck, who produced the album that we're about to talk about today. In 2012, they released a covers album called Underwater Sunshine, which subsequently also became the name of a podcast that Adam does with writer James Campion, and a music festival that we talked about in New York featuring independent artists, for which Adam is the executive producer and Katie is the executive writer. In 2014, Counting Crows released Somewhere Under Wonderland as the first album of new material in 6 years, and first on Capitol Records after leaving Geffen following an 18-year relationship with that label. So that brings us to this year, 2021, and the release of 4 songs called Butter Miracle Suite 1. There is currently, as Shane mentioned, a Butter Miracle Suite 2 in the works being created, and plans to release them together as a complete album once they're finished. These 4 songs are the first original material in 7 years, and they're unique in that the ending of each song transitions into the next one for one complete work. For production, Counting Crows once again used Brian Deck, as I mentioned, who produced the Sunday Mornings half of their 2008 concept album. Adam Duritz has been quoted saying that the idea to create these songs as a suite came to him in August of 2019 when he was finishing writing the first song, called Tallgrass, on piano while staying with a friend in London. After moving to a new chord progression, he started singing new lyrics that he originally thought might be a new section of the song, and he eventually realized this was a brand new song entirely. And from here he got the idea and got genuinely excited about creating a set of songs that all string together in this way. The album was officially released in May, along with a short film in June accompanying the songs. The album title, Adam has said in interviews, has a specific meaning which he has only told a select few people, just to keep an element of mystery to the album. Perhaps we can throw a guess or two out as we talk about these songs. Should we get into the music?
I'm psyched.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. The first track, or the first part of the suite, is called Tallgrass.
Come outside, she said to me, as if I knew just what she'd say. Come outside, we'll watch tomorrow, pull the curtain on today. Come outside into the tall grass and the old corn and the shit. Come outside, oh child, into the wild and weep for it. And all along I know I don't know why.
God, there are a lot of things that are really exciting about this song to me. So the first time I heard it was the first time a lot of people heard it, which was when Adam and Emmy played it live on a Stephen Kellogg live stream last year, long before the record came out. But it was just acoustic. So it was really hard to kind of picture what it was going to be, unless you know Adam a little, at which point you're like, oh, okay, I hear what's going to happen here. And we were very excited. But this is one of those songs that, like, as a friend, I'm so proud that he wrote this. As a fan, it made me cry more than once. And I think the part that kills me is the connection to the rabbits and children. There's blood upon the clover, and oh God, his eyes are open wide.
Life is gone. And there's blood upon the clover, and oh God, his eyes are open wide, staring up at me in infinity in the shrinking English sky. And all along,
But then later makes us shake like rabbits, which of course has been used as a moment of dying, not a moment of life.
the times we shook like rabbits, felt like children, made us ask this, can't you
And
see?
then
Yeah.
you've got the made us feel like children, and then later there are trains that can take a girl to Paris. There are planes that could bring you home. There are some of us get broken when we're children, and we never get it back once that's gone.
Some of us get broken when we're children. You never get it back once that is gone.
And all of
Yeah.
a sudden, I was just like, I was weeping. And it was because you start with the rifle and the disillusionment of the rabbit and this whole moment. And of course, he's got one eye open to the rain at one point. So everything's about these open eyes and this shaking, gasping last moment. And then we go back to childhood. And that's just a skyrocket of a start for something that's going to play out into a world of relationships. These characters are all in conversation with each other and themselves and his previous work. I mean, there are references to "Have You Seen Me Lately" in the song. It's just so exciting. Also, hats off to Adam for, I think, being the first person to use the word ossifies in a rock song.
I was wondering, especially
That
as
was great.
PTs, wondering if we'd have any reference to any other songs that have
Oh,
that. Yes,
man.
that what a
I've
cool
looked.
way to depict something coming to being. Yeah.
And as the idea ossifies, I can't believe it's mine.
I was reading that Adam, not only does he take a lot of time in between albums for good reason, as a quality over quantity thing, as you were alluding to. I also heard that as a byproduct of his dissociative disorder, he almost has to relearn playing the piano every time. It's like that doesn't stick for him. This is the first song that he wrote for this, and really the first in years. And he just got the inspiration there in London and figured out how to get a piano up to his friend's house there in London. And you can tell it sort of starts more rudimentary, and then, of course, the band folds in and things blow up from there. But just thinking about how in some ways that limitation might be part of what helps him be creative, because he almost has to relearn. And that's something that keeps this music fresh, I think, for him in a way. I'm sure there's many parts of that he wishes were different, but that's one thing that he turns into a strength, I think, and that's an interesting part of this song and this album to start, I think.
I wasn't sure if that was public knowledge or not, the piano thing. So I'm glad to hear that that's something. I wasn't going to bring it up.
Yeah.
Because I sometimes forget what I know from where I know.
Yeah.
But that to me is maybe the most inspirational part of his songwriting, in a way that no other songwriter does. Everything is a blank page, always.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's how poetry is written, and he hates to have his lyrics compared to poetry, and I get why. He's doing something different. He's adding tones, like when the electronic bit comes in at the end of Tall Grass, and all of a sudden we have literal static on the airwaves, right? Like, okay, that's really cool. You can't do that with a poem. I know, I've tried. So it's really, I get the kickback on that. That said, he's having to start everything like you would if you're writing a different kind of media, because most people's skill set is defined. This never is. That might sound limited to people. That makes him actually more dangerous. It means it's unlimited.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That's what I was trying to say for sure.
Yeah, so there's not a clear structure, defined lines and rules that have kind of boxed him in. It's just, somebody who has tons of knowledge on writing and music and creating sounds, but has an abundance of options when he sits down every time to choose from to create something, which probably explains why sometimes there's gaps in the making of the music. I think I either saw in an interview or read, somebody was quoting him in an interview, that oftentimes when he gets the itch to write, that he wants to sit down, write the song, create the song, produce it, go on tour, make the album, do everything right away, and then it's done and it's bottled up and put on the shelf for a while, and then he needs a break because he gets so wrapped up in that process. When he's in it, he's fully in it. So those gaps almost are necessary to recharge or rejuvenate, so that when he gets those creative juices flowing again, it will be a product that's consistent with what we come to expect.
I love too, Katie, you had mentioned earlier that he often borrows words and lyrics from other songs, and the climb out your bedroom window, I was immediately taken back to several songs, but thinking about A Murder of One, that's, you can look outside your window, just that idea of kind of escaping and that feeling of exploring and getting back outside. And for Adam, I took that as maybe going back to creating and getting back to some of the things that he does. But I love that he ties those things together in future songs. He does it the right amount. If it was rehashed over and over again, you might start thinking, are there original ideas being left out here? But to sprinkle them in as little breadcrumb trails from album to album, I think really connects you to the music, especially as a longtime fan.
Well, and I think when he does Round Here, I don't think he does this insert anymore, but in the bridge where he sometimes inserts original stuff, a lot of times you get that come outside sound.
Mm-hmm.
And so of course we get come outside, she said to me, just like I knew just what she'd say. And it's like, wait a minute, now we're referencing things that people who've seen the shows might recognize, but that aren't actually in, so we've got the bedroom window reference, which we've got in A Murder of One. Then we have live reference points to Round Here. It's just so
Palisades is in there.
Yeah, and that one's there too. Yeah, and it's so cool to me that he's figured out how to take and prune lines from one thing and repot them in another place, right?
Right. And Katie, I'm interested in your thoughts on this. I may just be pushing it too hard as a longtime fan, but I was getting lost a little bit on the tense at the beginning of, who she might be. At the beginning when it says come outside, she said to me, as if I knew just what she'd say, so it's like somebody that he maybe knows very well, but it sounds like somebody that is almost like a muse or somebody that's leading him to the thing. And so immediately as a longtime fan, I'm like, oh, that's Maria. This is Maria that's calling him outside or calling him out to play music. But I wondered if that entered into your mind at all when you read that line.
I've read enough reviews to know that is right now people's read on that line is that it's supposed to reference back to Maria. And that makes sense. I know the way he uses Maria in his songs as a stand-in sometimes for feelings that would be hard to express from his own narrative perspective. So in a dissociative way, that read absolutely makes sense. For me, the first time I heard it, I wasn't sure until we hit there are planes that or trains that could take a girl to Paris. There are planes that could take her home. And then all of a sudden I was like, this girl is going away. This is the girl who's leaving. And I became just enraptured with this idea of somebody who means everything. And that hasn't changed. But, it changes from, at one point, he says, she takes a train to Paris for a weekend with her friends. They take you places, trains in summers at 200 miles an hour.
She takes a train to Paris for a weekend with a friend. They take you places, trains in summers at 200 miles an hour that you've never been. Did I ever say the way your breath takes mine away?
Oh, I forgot. I cried there too. Did I ever say the way your breath takes mine away?
Oh yeah, that's a beautiful line.
That gives me chills.
And the instrumental around that line too, that I wonder, is it Emmy that is strumming mandolin at that moment? Yeah,
he nails that. But then when it goes from, the train can take you places too. There are trains that can take a girl to Paris. There are planes that can bring you home. I feel like she's home. And he could take a plane, but something's broken and he doesn't know why. And
Yeah.
I'm sure some of that is from personal knowledge of just who he is as a person.
Yeah.
And I think some of it is probably just conjecture, right? I think we all make up our own read of the story, especially on something this long in narrative. But I've seen a lot of people talking about, okay, is the beginning of this record saying goodbye to Maria? And I don't necessarily think it is. I wouldn't be shocked if that character shows up again.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be shocked if that character shows up somewhere in the record, next record. But I don't know. I feel like it is kicking off an understanding that we're about to meet a narrator who doesn't have a lot of quiet moments, right? There's a lot of stage and a lot of noise in the world of this.
Mm-hmm.
And to get that narrator from the quiet to the noise to the audience instead of being on stage, because this record doesn't end with our character on stage. It ends with the character in the audience for the first time ever.
Yes, I love
and
that.
I think that for me, going home means being a fan, not being on stage. And so I feel like this girl who's trying to get him to come see, right, the sunrise or the sunsets and all these things, is trying to remind him there are things outside of your noise.
I think that's a great interpretation. Shane and I have talked on multiple episodes just about how your interpretation of music is your own, and that's one of the things I think so nice, especially about Counting Crows lyrics, is there's enough specificity, as you mentioned, in those those personal names and places that really tether you to it, but enough open space for you to roam free and insert those lyrics into your own life and your own narrative. And I think that's interesting to have three of us that are such big fans to hear how that filters through our own interpretation and where we end up with. That's so interesting.
Trevor, you mentioned in your intro about the short film that was done to accompany this music. And I watched that probably before I really did a deep dive of the lyrics. I'd listened to the album a few times and got most of the lyrics, but I hadn't sat down and tried to interpret the meaning before watching that film. And the film was outstanding, but I think it kind of directed me in a place where I was interpreting the album and internalizing it further based on what I was visually seeing, which is something we don't normally do when all we have is the lyrics. Katie, do you by chance know if Adam was involved with the production of that, or at least approved it and said, yes, this does fit the album, this makes sense to some degree?
He gave the filmmaker control. He had things he wanted, but Cliff is a friend of his, so it was a natural connection. Cliff knew how to. Clifton Collins Jr. Pardon me, is a brilliant actor and really did a great job with it. But I would say the band was removed, sort of, but they knew what they wanted to. It was one of those that he didn't want to direct it. He didn't want to write the video, but he did want it to tell a certain story.
Sure. Yeah. So for me, seeing how that started with the middle-aged older man in his cabin or somewhere out in the country, reflecting on life, writing, you can see the place is a little messy, looks kind of scattered, and then to wander out into the tall grass and the lyrics, the contrast between the tall grass representing life and growth and something that's blooming, and then there's also matter that's decaying, and a rabbit that you see is shot in the film that's dying in the midst of so many things that are thriving and living. It made me think this is a guy reflecting on the purpose of life, the meaning, and trying to figure out how everything pieces together and how it's all kind of interconnected, and things go pretty quickly from life forming to ending, and how all that's kind of tied up in that tall grass. To me, it set the stage for the whole album.
Stare out at the grassland, past the living and the dead, matter forming and decaying, a perpetual uprising. Oh, let there be a revolution and a light to lead us on, just a ball of souls revolving.
the perpetual uprising, the whole idea going back to that infinite and ageless. Well, okay, that's why we can shake like rabbits and feel like children, is because childhood and being born is infinite and ageless. So is dying.
Yeah.
So to live is to be infinite and ageless, and to die is to be infinite and ageless.
Very true.
It's incredible to me.
I have been to London once in my life, and it happened to be when Adam was in London writing these songs. And I would, because I sort of follow all of that, and I was listening to the podcast. Of course, he had just shaved his head before this trip and all of these things. I just thought a cool connection, thinking that he was in London at the same time that I'm also there listening to the podcast and Counting Crows music.
Yeah, that is really cool.
All right, well, a beautiful way to start this suite. Let's transition into the next part of the suite. This is called Elevator Boots.
No, I don't know why. Bobby was a kid from around the town, kicks pumped up and head held down, underwater more than he was up. He dreamed submarines in bottle green, imaginary flight machines, but in blue jean flares he bubbled like a 7-Up. Everybody wants to know you when you're the only one to know. Shoot it till you feel alive and play one more show. Looking at the buzz to shake you till it turns around. You can't stop feeling the boss with suits and the elevator boots us down. You can't help feeling.
Man, I really like this song. It's probably my favorite on the suite if I had to pick one. That transition is awesome, where the beat really picks up. It kind of takes you as a listener from this more deep, reflective, personal state, kind of a seriousness to the tall grass, to this more lighthearted, fun atmosphere. And again, looking back to the film that's paired with this here, you can tell it's a memory or a reflection on the past, kind of a flashback, or somebody who's maybe daydreaming and thinking about that time in their life when they were out touring and caught up in the life of a musician, the fast life, the travel, the parties, all the women. It's a pretty fun transition to go from a fairly serious first song contemplating life and purpose and whether or not people can see who you are and things of that nature, to now fun, the high, the excitement of touring as a musician.
That's a perfect way to describe this song. It feels like moving from something very confessional into something narrative. Even though you get those narrative or those confessional moments, still you get that, like, I met Alice near the Alamo one summer in San Antonio. I remember her. I don't remember me.
I met Alice near the Alamo one summer in San Antonio. I remember her, I don't remember me.
Oh, I love that line.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's
so
insanely reflective.
Yeah.
But it's buried under that jangly, catchy. And then, of course, you get to the chorus. You got the elevator boots. And it's so catchy, and it's metrically broken well. And I know we talk a lot about, we're probably going to have to, Springsteen, The Who, sounds that, or Elton John, things that, but I hear Billy Joel in this chorus too, and especially with that, and they want you, and that stretched syllable in the middle of a lot of staccato notes. That's a very Billy Joel trick to pull, and I love that so much. This song to me just sounds good. This is a solid rock song.
It reminds me a lot of classic Counting Crows too. It just has that vibe. Like if you played this song to a fan who knows of Counting Crows but doesn't really know them too well, I mean, they would recognize it right away.
Oh yeah.
But there's some songs, like I'm not sure if that would be the case with the Tall Grass and some of the Counting Crows' previous albums that they've released that deviated a little bit from some of their mainstream hits of the 90s. This one has that feel to it.
And she could tell you now if you want to, 'cause they want you. Do you want to? Sneak and sparkle, pen and glide. It's hard to feel, and I can't get high, and I don't always understand how to smile.
That line that you read about Alice near the Alamo is probably my favorite line on the entire suite. And I love how he revisits it later as it kind of slows down and says, Alice knows the secret. She could tell you now if you want to, because they want you. Do you want to? I took that as kind of like, as the rock star that's on the move and going from one show to the next, the music slows down and those words kind of slow down too, to kind of go, if you pause for a second here, this person that maybe you met that was a short-term thing has a lot of wisdom, or there's a lot of a connection that you could get out of this if you want it, if you want to kind of stay and listen to that a little bit. And then right into that, it picks up again with I snake and sparkle, pant and glide. So he's back on stage somewhere. He just doesn't quite get a chance to do that, or it's not the right time for that. And I just thought that was a brilliant way, if I'm interpreting that part
No,
right.
and I think you're nailing it. And I think what's really fascinating is that I snake and sparkle, paint and glide. Great lines. And he's said that his strength is verbs. He's not wrong. He knows how to use a verb. That line's great. But what's interesting to me is you've got something that strong, and then he sings the next line like it's a throwaway. It's not. It's the key to the whole record. But it's the way he throws it out vocally. It feels like a cast-off. And he said, and it's hard to feel, and I can't get high. And it's like, but it's cast off. Yeah. No, it's hard to feel is sort of the center of everything. It is buried in the middle of the most commercial sounding song on the record. That's brilliant.
I remember when Hard Candy came out, and I was like 16, 17, somewhere in there, I think. And coming off of August and Recovering the Satellites and even This Desert Life and being this, angsty teenager, I was just all over Counting Crows for that reason.
Oh, yeah.
The sadder the song, the better. And I remember initially when Hard Candy came out, having to figure out how to have a relationship with that album and assimilate it into my vision of who Adam Duritz and the Counting Crows were. And it took me a while to do it, and now it's one of my favorite of their albums. But looking back too, like you said, all of that stuff is still there. I mean, it's just buried in some of this glossy, bubblegummy stuff. But man, some of the darkest lyrics of their whole discography, you could argue, is on Hard Candy.
I would argue
I think that's
that.
a good example of this line too. Yeah, it's hard to feel. I can't get high. Let's keep singing about going to another show. I just think that's a really cool little dichotomy within this song and within Counting Crows if you're paying attention sometimes.
Yeah, I read something from an interview with Adam that I wanted to share that fits right into with what we're talking about here in reference to this song. He said that that's from the perspective of the part of me that plays music. Life can be very temporary. People, towns, places, they come into our life and they fade out of your life as you pass by. But there's always this gig the next day. The permanent part of it is still the music, and there's always another gig, and that's the thrill and excitement of it. I thought that was pretty cool, for him to say that, and how that connects with the lyrics and what you're getting, from that, and that you can't get high, and it is hard to feel at times, but that's kind of what you're chasing, and that's always why it's sort of the next big thing that you're seeking, whether it's another show, or I don't know, we could extrapolate that and apply it to so many things in life where you're constantly looking for the next big thing, or the next fix, or the next moment, the next high, and there's always kind of that cycle that keeps coming around.
I love that quote.
And we'll get into it later with the fourth song on this suite, but from the perspective of a fan of music, sometimes that can be the same thing, that they're looking for the next show or the next song or the next album, that there's that longing for that feeling of feeling high and free and excited, and how the music can do that for you, whether you're the performer or the listener. And so I think that's kind of foreshadowing for how this suite ends, and the film accompanied with it as well, that shows, you know, how somebody can be both of those roles. They can be the musician and the fan and understand how that moves them on both levels of that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, should we transition to part 3?
It's my favorite song on the record.
I might have to agree
Let's
with
do
you.
it. All right, so with that, we'll transition into the third track of this suite. This one is titled Angel of 14th Street.
One more town.
So I had a visceral reaction to Angel of 14th Street. I think was similar to my reaction when Dislocation came out on Somewhere Under Wonderland, which was not most people's favorite track on that record. And I've had to have some pretty bad knockdown brawls with people to try to say, no, this song is brilliant. And no, I can't tell you why. Because I can't explain it myself. So synesthesia is a condition where your sensory input gets mixed up. And most people, whether they have it or not, are affected by it if they hear it in something else. I always use Marcy Playground's Sex and Candy, Disco Lemonade, which is a phrase that doesn't really mean anything, but really strikes something in people. Angel of 14th Street did the same thing for me that Dislocation did, which was I went, oh, I see myself. There I am. And that's a hard thing for me to get a handle on these days. Since my stroke, I don't actually recognize my own face in the mirror. It's a face and I can work with it, but it doesn't look familiar to me.
Wow.
And it's just a neurological hiccup. But between that and then losing the vision in my left eye to optic neuritis, I started having to recognize myself in other things. So I got a bunch of tattoos, and I wear rock shirts, and that is how I recognize myself. Because if I look in the mirror, I don't see my face, but like today I'm wearing a mountain goat shirt. Well, okay, there I am, you know? And so in this record where he does the angel learns to live with things that make her feel uneasy, and after all the dreaming's done, she screams, wake up, wake up, wake up. And that points back up to a place earlier in the song where he says, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up new. Put on the clothes that make you feel like you're not broken.
Wake up, wake up, wake up. Wake up new. Put on clothes that make you feel like you're not broken.
And so that masking technique, the feeling like I'm not broken, leads to me acting like I'm not broken, which leads to me being alive. I feel like a lot of people who have become in any way neurologically or physically impaired are constantly trying to find quote unquote clothes that make them feel less broken, because the skin and the body doesn't work. And notice I say that's an accident. It just happens now. The body looks like this. I am not the body. And y'all are PTs, so you get that. You get that there has to be a separation sometimes.
Absolutely.
And so the body is a thing I work with to stay on this plane. This song feels like a negotiation between somebody who's dealing with the body, but also with the soul, and trying to connect that, which goes back to that. If God is dead, then why am I here? This is a person that's seeking desperately to figure out their part in the tapestry. And I think it's stunning. And this song I sobbed almost all the way through. And then when the brass came in, I think I actually gasped the first time I heard it. Like I was so stunned.
That part's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and call it. This is my favorite one. It is also not something I can explain. It's a gut instinct. And my gut instinct on this one is just, so physically I can't see my face. I think in reality, none of us know our face. I'll go back to Billy Joel, right? We all have a mask that we wear, the stranger and all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we don't recognize the stranger in ourselves, which it's weird to have to go back to 1971 to explain how I feel now. But I have to.
It's not weird to us.
The exploration here is going, okay, so I'm the stranger. But who is that? And I think, we mentioned Adam's talked about dissociative disorder. Though I don't think in any way we can say he is the narrator of this song. And I wouldn't presume something like that necessarily. But you get a really, really good read on that kind of disconnect between being and living, because those aren't the same thing. Again, something once you're big sick, you know. It also does something really interesting with her feathers stale with sex and beer, which feels like an American Girls reference.
Interesting. I got a Horse Dreamers Blues
and
reference to
I
that.
think Rain King's got some moments that could go. I mean, he's great with feathered as a verb. And he's great with feathers as a noun, and so I think it connects a lot. But man, the line that hit me, and only like super geeks are gonna agree, is that "leave a light on," which to me, the second I heard it, I was hearing, "Would you leave a light on for me?" Now, from Barely Out of Tuesday.
Yes,
and
I would immediately thought of Barely Out of Tuesday as
well. That reference point back to the "Can you see her waiting there down by the sea?" Okay, well, we're not by the sea, but this is a song about someone waiting to live and then realizing, no, wake up, this is a recording. You got to get out of here. You got to shake this off.
Wake up, this is a recording, a ghost of England, when we get a dream of America. Coming out the corner of your...
I love your interpretation of this song. I'm so glad that you had the experience to unpack some of that, even if it's through your own lens. I think a lot of that makes a lot of sense. And this was one that I probably would have to agree with you was my favorite of the bunch. And I didn't have that all unpacked myself, but I think I'm connecting to it more deeply through yours. I just loved the trumpet, like you said. You said it almost made you gasp. I'd have to say it was a similar thing. I mean, it's such a pure and high sound, that first one. That's Chris Watson, who is also a jazz and gospel and Zydeco player, and who was also featured at the beginning of Palisades Park. What a perfect spot for it, and it really does just jump out. And man, it really makes this song for me.
Yeah, it sends it into the stratosphere. And like I said, I'd already kind of been crying. The first time I listened to the whole suite, I pretty much cried throughout, which I hate to admit, but it's just how it worked. And I had a physical reaction when that came on because I wasn't ready for it. And that's a good thing. Yeah, I love when he catches me off balance.
Oh, yeah. When music can move you like that.
Right.
What did you make of the change in subject with all the repetition of leaving the light on? I mean, I really liked that part. That's what I found myself singing along a lot with the refrain there. But I found it interesting. It goes from, did we leave the light on, to does he need a light on, to did he leave a light on? Did she leave a light on? Do we need the light on? So he toggles back and forth between she, he, and we, and who left the light on and who needs the light on. Is it kind of depicting that everybody kind of needs somebody to leave a light on for them, and that, you're trying to figure that out? I'm not totally sure if I understand why that subject was changed so much in there.
If I had to guess, that's the correct answer. I think that's right. The line hit me a little differently in a weird, but again, this song was like a personal gut punch for me. This was a hard one for me initially, not because I didn't love it. I immediately loved it. So when you're anxious, there are two things that when you leave the house become problematic. Did I leave the oven on? and did I leave a light on, right?
Right.
Okay, now add, I've had a house fire. So this, did I leave the light on? Did he leave the light on? Did she leave the light on? That makes sense, and it feels like anxiety and static the way your brain does. Great, that's cool. Here's the personal part that's weird for me, though. So during COVID, my husband works at a hospital, and I just realized Adam's never heard me talk about this song. If you're listening, Adam, sorry, this is weird. So Andy works at a hospital, and COVID obviously has made us all very anxious. And I was having panic attacks, like I'd say 5 or 6 a week, which is way not normal for me. I'm a 2 a week girl at most. I'm kidding. Usually not nearly that often either. But my doctor was like, if we can get him down to 2 a week, that'd be great. Like, that'd be awesome. Like, let's give it a go.
All right.
But one of the problems I was having is I would wake up and have a panic attack because I wouldn't know where I was. That doesn't make any sense. But I told my husband the whole time I was a kid, I slept with the light on. Like, not nightlight. That's normal people behavior. We're talking full-on banker's lamp tilted towards. My husband has a hard time sleeping with lights on. Well, had a hard time sleeping with lights on. He says, you know what? The bedroom lights are on a dimmer switch. Let's give this a go. All of a sudden, my nighttime panic attacks stop. And we have no idea what's happened, but we're like, okay, well, that takes us to 2 a week. We're good. So then in February, I found out I had gone completely blind in my left eye, which I didn't realize had happened, because the funny thing about lying is if you do it well enough, you buy your own lie. And so when I couldn't see something, I'd think, oh, I'm just crazy. I can see it. I just can't process it or whatever. Or this is some kind of, no, it's gone. And I didn't know that yet. But it winds up when I was waking up in the dark, I was waking up in true dark, meaning I literally woke up to a void. There was nothing. And so that was setting off the panic attacks. I literally didn't know where I was. And did he leave a light on? Did they leave a light on? Did we leave a light on? And then tying it to, if God is dead, why am I here? We just moved to somewhere south of here. Did we leave a light on? We've got all these sort of evocative, meaningful lines that aren't necessarily narrative. They're more imagistic. But it's tied to, did we leave a light on? Do you need the light on? And it's not right, my read is. But personally, yeah, I think I needed a light on more than anyone knew. And for reasons of anxiety and static, but also for reasons of blindness and being lost in a void. And I think that metaphorically that actually does translate, because I think we've all been in a void for a while.
Yeah.
And, you know, I remember John Oliver blowing up the year 2016 because it was the worst year ever, right? Because we lost David Bowie and Prince. Obviously, the political election was sort of a lightning rod. Everybody kind of became garbage people on the internet. It was horrible. Yeah. And then 2017 was worse. And then 2018 was worse. I think Jason Isbell even says something like, this last year's been a son of a bitch for almost everyone I know. That came out, I think, in 2019. And then after that, it got worse.
Yes.
So I think the light, I mean, we've needed it at least since John Oliver blew up 2016. I think I mark Bowie's death as the downhill. So January, 10th, 2016, it's all downhill from there.
I think that's totally fair. I might even just throw in, if God is dead, why am I here? Maybe that's about David Bowie's death.
Works
too.
for me.
Works for me.
I'll allow it.
Yeah. I think that's a great interpretation. Thanks for sharing the personal connection there. One thing that Trevor has mentioned a lot, and I like it, it's that once the music is put out there, it doesn't really belong to the artist per se anymore. It's now for the listener to consume and interpret. And although there may have been a correct answer or meaning behind the song, something that inspired the artist to write it, it doesn't really matter once it's out there. It's for the listener to interpret, and the goal isn't really to figure out the song necessarily. But it's to connect to it. And as the artist, they want people to be moved. They want people to be empowered and feel the music. And as the listener, that's kind of what we want too. So regardless of which way you look at it, it's meaningful in both senses. And that's something that Trevor and I were talking about in reference to this song, that there is two ways to take it, because sometimes leaving the light on is something you do. It's a mistake. You forget to shut it off. So there is that anxiety part of it, or forgetfulness, where did I remember to shut the oven off? Did we shut the lights off? Did we pack a swimsuit? Like whatever it is you're leaving, you're kind of reflecting on, like, did everything get done? So there is kind of that feeling that's evoked. But then also the idea that people can leave the light on for you, and that's a sign of caring. Somebody's coming late, or like Motel 6 will leave the light on for you.
Right.
So at first when I looked at that, I was thinking somebody left the light on, and this character is questioning, like, did I leave the light on? Did she leave it on? Did somebody leave it on? And then, like, well, if I left it on and I forgot that I left it on, do I need the light on? Did I leave it on for myself? Like, am I the one who left the light on because I need the light on? Or did somebody else leave it on for me because I need it? But just this whole idea of the light being a significant part of the song. And I'm not sure I totally understand it either, but it really grabbed me as kind of the highlight.
The reference it's brilliant all the way out, but then if God is dead, why am I here? Did he leave a light on for me? Is a totally different, talk about a tuning fork, right? Because
no kidding,
by the end, there is a reference, but only really one. And it's everybody in the world. Did we leave the light on? Should we leave the light on? Is that a good idea? But then all of a sudden it's cosmically, right, is the light on for me here?
Yeah.
And
I picked up on that too. That was the only time that there was an actual name to a character and not just a pronoun.
Right.
And that was interesting.
I think that's awesome interpretation from both of you. Yeah, I just couldn't quite dig myself in on this one to try to unpack that, but the lines that I kept coming back to was trying to juggle what the meaning behind that was, and I'd oscillate between it being a positive thing or something anxiety provoking. So I think that's where it hinges for me as well. I'm going to go back and listen with all those thoughts in mind and see where maybe it concretizes.
Isn't that what anxiety is? Either the fear that a good thing is going to come to an end, and or that we're going to get too much of it and won't be good anymore.
Yeah.
So I feel like the anxiety and the safety of it are actually the same thing. Anxiety is the absence of safety. And it absolutely just astounds me that he's able to write. I would kill to be able to write like this.
Yeah, that whole idea of lacking control or not having an understanding.
Yeah.
Whether it be good or bad, it can cause anxiety. Whether you're setting out to perform, which should be a positive thing, people coming to watch you, that can provoke anxiety, and so can fear. So can anything that's unsettling or just not secure.
Yeah. I
wanted to comment on what you were sharing about the tattoos and wearing the rock shirts to remind yourself of who you are, that idea of appearance to show not only others who you are, but also who yourself. And in your situation, it's a little more unique, obviously, from what you shared from your medical history. But in general, this idea of looking the part, or, representing yourself in the way that you want others to see you. There is something about your clothing and how you wear your hair and things like that, it is in a way, not really as far as saying a costume, but it is something that we can define ourselves as and maybe at times hide behind. If you wake up and things just aren't going well, you say, by golly, I'm gonna look good today. I'm gonna put on a collared shirt. I'm gonna go to work. I'm gonna talk the part, look the part. I'm not gonna let people know that there's something else going on behind the scenes or deeper down, because you have to be a certain way. So I think in general, everybody can relate to that. And then to look at what Adam has shared about his dissociative personality trait, and, how he always saw himself as somebody different than what he saw in the mirror. So he said growing up, he always felt like when he looked in the mirror, he was supposed to see somebody else. And in an interview, I kind of gathered that's what the dreads and the beard and all that stemmed from, is that he slowly started to put that together. And then eventually he said, this is how I've seen myself for all these years, not the person that I was born before. So that's just kind of interesting how maybe the writer of the song has that personal connection to it as well.
I think that's a really good observation, because I think there is a degree of dissociation. Actually, it's funny, I brought up dislocation in this track and dislocation. That makes more sense on a gut level than on a logical level. It's more sensory. I'm written in the radio. I dream in my TV. Dislocation.
Right. Yeah.
But so Ehlers-Danlos, the primary like disorder part is that things dislocate all the time, and there's no connective tissue that functions. And my collagen is written incorrectly in the DNA. That's fine. I've always been that way. But that also means I learned how to reset body parts real early. So dislocating has always been a part of my life, which different than dissociation, but it's similar enough and has enough of the same. Well, like I said, the body and my mind. I think some people have to deal with the mind and my mind. And I think dissociation is the mind, my mind, whereas dislocation is the body, my mind. So I don't know if that made sense.
It did make sense. I think I think that makes a lot of sense, and I can see the ties between this and dislocation now in that way. Even this is a recording part and written in the radio. You know, those two things overlap a little bit to me in the lyrics. Well, should we transition to the last part of this suite?
Let's do it.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, we're going to transition to the fourth and final song on the suite. This is Bobby and the Rat Kings.
Kid pushing buttons when I want to go home. My generation hasn't even got a name of its own.
This was probably my favorite transition out of one movement of the suite to the next. Just have that guitar, very catchy. And then the lyrics, I'm an elevator kid pushing buttons when I want to go home. I'm reading the lyrics to my right here that say, my generation hasn't even got a name of its own, but it's more rightly said, my generation. You got to have the extra G in there. Of course, tying it to The Who. And then just reminding us that there is a difference in today's generation than when that song was written. With those next words, we just buy what the TV sells and almost never stop wishing we were somebody else. But the unifying part to that song and that era. But tonight in the dark, I can be myself.
We just buy what the TV sells, and it almost never stop wishing we were somebody else. But tonight in the dark, I can be myself. When Bobby and the Rat King come to play.
It's so
the
brilliant.
transition was amazing.
I'm going to geek out in my field on this song. Metrically, please. I don't know that anyone has done anything this exciting in a long time outside of hip hop. We're going to have to take Run the Jewels off the table for me to make that comment, right? But like we all like in terms of rock music, the syllabic and like mid line rhymes and in-stopped rhymes are so solid and they're outrageous.
She tried to edit Reddit, instead it said it had eaten her phone. She goes from Tinder to Cinder till she remembers she's a flame of her own.
Z tried to edit Reddit, but instead it said it had eaten her phone. She goes from Tinder to Cinder till she remembers she's a flame of her own. That's brilliant. But then after it pulls out of that beautiful slow bridge, it goes back in on that toot, 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 which also feels like The Who. The bridge feels very E Street Band, but that toot, 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 toot playing us back in.
So there's some leather-wrapped fender strap kid with a pick finger twitch. He's got a recipe for radio rain. don't know which.
And then we get some leather-wrapped, fender-strapped kid with a pick finger twitch. He's got a recipe for radio or rain, I don't know which. Jesus, I wish I'd written that.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, you said it really well. I love the inner rhyme of that, especially on that Tinder to Cinder.
Oh, right?
Just so good.
Way to bring the contemporary problem of too much information and input into a song that sounds like a classic song that would have no conversation with that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We've literally got generation and then Reddit within a minute of each other. And that's right. That's
And
how
Tinder,
it should be.
right,
That's
yeah.
how these things work.
Yeah.
That's how society is. It's additive and collaborative. It's not subtractive. So by using his reference points from knowing generations of music, he's got an encyclopedic knowledge, but then also interacting with the actual world that we live in, which I think is a very important thing people forget to do.
Yes.
He takes us from Bobby and his perspective to somebody who learns that they're allowed to love the music too, and they can just go find themselves at the show. They don't have to find themselves in the spotlight. You can find yourself in the dark, right?
And for Adam, I think as big of a star as he is, I get the sense, especially in listening to his Underwater Sunshine podcast obsessively, that he sees himself in both of those lights equally. I get the sense that he's not that different than me and Shane doing this nerdy podcast when him and James get together doing that. I mean, all of the stuff he pours into, the level of excitement he gets in his voice when he's talking about those connections, like you said, that are additive over time. It gives me some excitement as somebody that can, quote, only experience music from that side of the spotlight, that this is a pretty good spot to be.
Yeah.
And I think
Right,
he
yeah.
recognizes that even as somebody who lives in both parts of it.
That's why we do the festival, right? I mean, he's got to
Right.
be in the audience sometimes too, but he hasn't really gotten to
Yeah.
do that in a while.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's funny. I keep hearing first album in 7 years, and that's true. There is another side of the truth, which is he's guested on records you wouldn't believe over the last 7 years. So many.
Yeah.
Records you'll never
Yeah.
hear, records you've heard already. And I mean, he's constantly providing background vocals or, some kind of an ear or a sounding board, right? He's constantly immersed and engaged in up and coming music and with music that's being written by contemporaries.
Yeah.
Because of that, I mean, you get things like Matt Susich's very COVID-directed New Normal, which is beautiful and warm and sad and hopeful. And Adam's background vocals are mixing in the back. He did a song on Sean Barnes' Sissy, which...
Yeah. That I loved that album that year.
Routines.
Shoot, why am I?
Yeah, he
Routines,
did
yes.
Routines with
what
him.
a beautiful song. Yeah.
And Sean's records are always great. Sissy was a breakout, and he's done nothing but just get better. And it's like,
Yeah.
fuck that guy. And I'm saying that,
Back to that.
if you're listening to this, Sean, fuck you. You're too
Fuck
good
you,
at this.
Sean. Yep.
But he's so talented. But being around music as a fan, I do think informs this record, and I think that makes that 7-year gap not a gap.
Yeah.
I want to touch on the film again, because I really like the part where you see the older musician in the crowd. He's playing his own guitar as he's watching the band, and he just has this almost a smirk on his face. He's just thrilled to be there, to come full circle from the beginning of the film and the beginning of this album. Somebody sitting, writing, reflecting on the past, and then to look back and think about the time that they were touring as a musician and how exciting and fun that was, to then end with, ultimately the focal point is the music. It doesn't matter if you're the one making it or you're the fan. It's the music that brings everybody together. It's the music that gives you that experience, that makes you feel alive and gives you that high and makes you want to come back for more, whether it's the next tour date or the next concert on your list when you can scrounge together the money to go pay for another show if you're the fan to go watch it. it's the music that does that to you.
It's almost defiant in the video, isn't it? Like the character has learned it's acceptable to just love music again, and that is defiance. At this point, loving something, genuinely loving it, and allowing yourself to genuinely love it, is in absolute direct defiance of contemporary culture.
Wow, I think that's so true, and I had never thought of it in that way. And in some ways, I feel like that's being a fan of Counting Crows, because, I mean, you know, they started out with August and Everything After, and every highbrow critic was talking about how they were the next Van Morrison and all these things. And then somewhere in there, someone decided that it wasn't, quote, cool to like Counting Crows. And I think Counting Crows, or Adam specifically, just was like, I can't control that. I don't even care about that. And they just kept doing their thing. Suddenly now it's cool to like Counting Crows again, because the people that continue to listen, and frankly, people that continue to create music, are talking about how important Counting Crows has been to their development as a fan or even as an artist. So I think that that's exactly right. Just being defiant of just saying, I love this, and I don't care what anybody says.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting people have that perspective, because Adam has said that they were approached early on by a lot of people who would have given them a ton of money to, quote unquote, sell out and do things somebody else's way, but they decided to continue doing things their way, and obviously it worked out pretty well for them. But those critics along the way probably don't know their full discography. They've probably never even listened to a full album, because if you were to only judge Counting Crows based on their radio hits, then maybe you could come to the conclusion that they're a pop band, or that they were appealing to mainstream with a few of those songs. But that kind of organically happened, that people just liked those songs, and that they ended up in a movie like Shrek, or that there was something that was catchy and could be sung along with easily, that it became a radio hit. But, you know, none of those songs that were quote unquote their popular songs were my favorite songs as a listener of Counting Crows. And that's not because they ended up on the radio. That's just because they have so many other really good songs that a lot of those critics probably never even heard. So it's not really fair to label them as, you know, selling out or becoming mainstream or whatever. But if there were those critics, then they're going to be proven wrong by a lot of the newest work, because obviously it's very unique, and it's very authentic and novel as well. I don't know too many people who have written a suite like this and connected 4 songs that could all stand alone, but that also weave into a 20-minute long story that has a film that goes along with it that's very moving. And I mean, there's so many things to this, so many layers. It's not, you know, just a pop band. I mean, this is a pretty deep artist, very good writer.
No, and I couldn't agree more. You know, it's funny. I'm glad you brought up the Shrek soundtrack, because I think that's where a lot of people went, oh, they're just a pop band. They just sold out. No, first of all, that's actually a good song. Second of all,
it is. Yeah, it is a good song.
Second of all, also on that soundtrack are Dashboard Confessionals As Lovers Go, which is a phenomenal, just bang up emo song, which has nothing to do with the rest of the songs on the record. We also have Pete Yorn's cover of the Buzzcocks' Ever Fallen in Love. That was a dynamic soundtrack.
Yeah.
But people didn't bother to look at the soundtrack.
For an animated, you know, children's type movie. That's something else. Yeah. I actually didn't realize all of those were on that soundtrack.
Yeah, it's a really good soundtrack.
In the shadows when the lights are doused, the cinder kids flare while they twist and shout with the sparks in the dark. That'll never go out.
I wanted to touch on one other part of the lyrics too. I love in that part with the leather-wrapped, fender-strapped kid at the end, where it says the cinder kids flare while they twist and shout. We're the sparks in the dark that will never go out. I love how he ties that to the prior line of she goes from tinder to cinder, just thinking about how you go from the flame to the ashes, but then the music bringing somebody, you know, bringing them back as they're moving together. I mean, the same way that you would like start a fire, you know, with movement and friction. And
it's brilliant, and it goes back to there be a revolution and a light to lead us on, a ball of souls revolving, spinning circles around the sun. We've got all these moments where the people themselves are the light. And people are the light and we can be ourselves in the dark, well, then the question, did we leave the light on, makes a little bit more sense too. So I think it's all braided throughout.
That's really cool. I hadn't considered those things
I never
being linked,
thought
but
about
that's
that.
really
Maybe
cool. Yeah.
maybe we're the light. Did we leave our light on? Maybe it's
Or did
not
we
a
forget to
physical
turn
light.
it on,
Maybe
right?
it's the light of our projection. You've all heard the phrase, whenever they show up, they just light up the room.
Right.
Somebody walks into the room, just their aura. Yeah, maybe that's a whole nother way to look at that previous song. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, your potential. Yeah, your true self. That's really
yeah,
cool.
Yeah. That's how I took that line initially when I read that. Going from tinder to cinder until you realize you're a flame of your own, or something along those lines. That tinder helps start the fire. You can be that substance that brings about the fire. Or when the fire goes out, you can turn to cinder, to ashes. I was thinking of the fire as music, whether that's a fan going to a concert or a musician putting out music. That sometimes when the music is over, you can be left as cinder and ashes, but that you can detach yourself from that too and realize that there's a fire in and of yourself, and you don't always need the music or whatever it may be in life, whatever metaphor you want to use that to apply to create a sense of belonging or fire in you, that you have that within you no matter what, without outside forces.
Yeah. Katie, do you know, on the bridge, I think I heard on an interview that came from a real story of him being out all night around Halloween in the Bay Area as a kid and just remembering that. And he actually did see Dorothy in drag. I think in the interview I heard they were actually in a back alley having sex with the Tin Man.
That makes so much more sense.
But just loving the whole thing of just being a kid that can jump on the BART and ride into town, see a show, and stay out all night, and everything that was going on in the Bay Area at that time, and that little sanctuary for people to be able to express themselves. I think I remember that, him talking about that being sort of based on a true story.
That sounds, I am pretty sure that's correct.
Yeah.
I got so distracted in the bridge because my friend is there. Z is the friend of mine, and it was so exciting the first time the song came on, and we were like, "Oh my God, there's Z!" Like we kind of like.
I saw Dorothy in drag, taking the Tin Man for a ride, and then Z the cat said she knew where to go. Then she kissed me without a thought, said sometimes memories are all that we got. So come on, boy, let's make some at the show.
What an awesome suite of 4 songs. I cannot wait for the next 4 to come out as well. What do you think, guys? Do you think that the connection and the transition between the songs will go from 4 to 5?
I have to think it'll be a separate story. Maybe some of the same characters will emerge, but I think it has to have some other concept or theme to it, because this suite feels complete to me. It feels like a full story, and everything kind of connects well. I'm sure you could add stuff to the middle or to the beginning or to the end, but it kind of stands alone by itself, and it has good closure. There's not really a cliffhanger that leaves itself for a part 2 per se, but that's my gut feeling on it. I'm not sure what to expect, but I know I'm excited, whatever it is.
I've been thinking about it like opera. I think it'll pull from themes, and I think musically, when I say themes, I mean musical themes, to carry the emotions from one place to another. But I don't know for sure if any of these characters will show back up.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I don't know. It will be interesting. I read in an interview, somebody was asking Adam about whether or not he set out to make this as a concept album or have all the songs connect, and he said no, that it just kind of happened that way, that he wrote the Tall Grass, and then it sort of blended into the next track he wrote, and then he thought, oh, maybe I could do this. We didn't talk about it earlier. There was a fifth song or an original fourth song that had to get scrapped and replaced because he was afraid that he was accidentally copying Elvis Costello song or part of one of his songs from back in the day. So I'm not sure where that all fit in there, but anyway, he responded basically by saying that he didn't think it was necessarily a concept album and that he never really sets out to write concept albums, but that usually themes organically emerge based on where he was at the time or who he was during that writing session or what the world was going through, and that those tend to find their way into his music naturally without him sitting down and saying, this is the theme, now I'm going to write some songs underneath it. He writes the songs and the theme kind of emerges, which I thought was pretty cool because obviously this seems like a concept album. It seems like it could be a movie. It was a short film, but it just kind of happened. It wasn't the intention, which I think is really cool.
I don't know if he'd shoot me for saying this because I don't know if he would agree, but I've been saying it's not a concept record, it's a conversation record. I think the songs are in conversation with each other.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
Very cool.
Maybe he'll hate it.
I'm going to say I hope we find out because that would mean he might listen.
We'll know if he hates it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Because I'll get a call.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I think this is a good time to wrap it up. I want to just say again, Katie, we are so happy to have had you join us. Your insight into the album, your relationship with the band, and then just even your love of music. I think finding some kindred spirits out there in listeners, but especially finding one in a guest and somebody that's done so much with it, with your blog, with your teaching, with your writing. We just feel really fortunate to have had you on here, and you're making me think about these songs in different ways as well. And I think this album is going to continue to grow on me just with the insight that we've all brought to talking about it today. So thank you so much for taking the time with us.
I really appreciate it. I had a great time, and I really appreciate a place to be able to talk about the Counting Crows like the geek I am, because it is something that these days I understand I have an implicit bias. So people aren't calling as often for comment on that.
Well, you always have a home here on Album Divers for sure.
Thank you.
I know we'll talk about Counting Crows, probably mentioned them in several podcasts already. I know we'll probably hit another album of theirs in the future because there's so many good ones.
And I couldn't agree more with what Trevor said. Katie, it's been a pleasure having you on the show and hearing your connection to the band and what you're doing in your personal life and your career with music. It's really cool to be able to connect with people like you. This is something that has spun out of the podcast that we never really envisioned or set out to do. We just wanted to get together and encourage each other to get back into listening to albums start to finish, whether that be an older album from our childhood that maybe we didn't fully understand, or forcing us to discover new artists and other great music that's coming out. And, we didn't really expect a ton of people to even listen too much or really cared about that. It was more about our project of just growing our friendship through music. And, it's been a pleasant surprise that we've been able to make other friends through this podcast, through the music, and bring them onto the show. And so it's just been a pleasure. It's been really awesome getting to know you and speaking with you, and something that would have never really expected, but it's been awesome. Yeah. It's been an honor. Thank you.
This was all my pleasure. This was very, very kind of you guys to let me talk with you.
Well, on that note, I think we'll call it a wrap for today, but until next time, everybody, go listen to a great album.
If you're enjoying listening to Album Divers, you can support our podcast by subscribing, reviewing, and sharing it with someone else that appreciates great music.
Follow and connect with us on Facebook and Instagram at Album Divers. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback about our take on an album that you already loved or had never heard before.
Do you have an album you want us to dive into? Email us at albumdiverspodcast@gmail.com, and we'll consider adding it to our queue for a future episode.
Thanks again for joining us. We hope you never stop discovering music that moves you to dive deeper. Until next time.